afternoon, everybody. I'm very grateful to have this opportunity to introduce my friend, President Cullerton. For those of you who are unaware, he came into the General Assembly in 1979, first in the House for 12 years, and then since 1992 in the Illinois Senate. And he was elected president in 2008, succeeding Emil Jones, who I guess is here as well. You know, he is a very smart and talented person. I don't know if you've had the opportunity to hear him do his stand-up routines, but they are hilarious. I'm sure what he has to say today is much more on the sober side, but he is a very smart and talented and funny person. I'm grateful to have him as a friend, and I know you will enjoy his remarks today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tony. I know you guys have heard this before. You've heard this introduction before. Some of you have anyway. And you'll have to listen to it again because I'm I'm uniquely positioned to make this introduction. So I'm the president of the Illinois Senate, but I want you to meet the Speaker of my House, Pam Cullerton, who's right here. So I am also very honored that my colleagues from the Senate have come here today. You know, we are in a very good position in the Illinois Senate. First of all, we have the largest Senate caucus, Republican or Democrat, in America, 40 members. And the 40 Democrats in the Illinois Senate is the most that we've ever had in the history of Illinois. So we're very proud of that efforts we had. And I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad you're going to watch this because this is about you, because we're going to try to do a presentation here that will hopefully help us get some solutions to some of our problems. I also have to tell you that Jay's really boosted my ego by telling me that this is sold out and that he had a waiting list of 350 people. And I'll tell you why it's a boost for my ego, because a year ago I gave this presentation, and then 2 weeks after the presentation, the Chicago Magazine came out with the list of the most powerful Chicagoans, the top 100, and the governor and I didn't make the list, okay? So it didn't bother me as much as my wife. My wife is a big fan of mine, and she said, well, you should really be on there, you know, you're the president of the Senate. And it wasn't, so I looked at the list, and there's some here that I have no problem, you know, in this room, losing to you, but there were actually 7 chefs that were on there. And I was thinking, God, you know, instead of going into politics, getting to be the president of the Illinois Senate, I should have opened a restaurant or something. So maybe this year, you know, if they're doing it again, if anybody knows it, maybe somebody's here from Chicago Magazine, you know. I know Jean-Claude Brizard ain't going to be on the list this year, so maybe there's some openings. Okay. But the fact that I didn't make the list, by the way, is that people in Chicago, by and large, don't pay a lot of attention to state government and state finances. So the reason why I love coming here is because I want to show you my PowerPoints. I don't think my height is blocking the view of anybody from the screen. And the pie charts and the graphs are all as a result of my wife telling me this is what people want to see. And so I came here in 2011, and I think we talked about the budget. Right? In 2012, last year we talked about pensions, and this year I'd like to talk about both. And I have a lot of slides, and I'm going to go through it as quickly as I can. The fastest speaker I've ever seen at City Club was Chris Kennedy when he gave his presentation. I'm going to try to do it just as fast as Chris Kennedy, okay? So we're going to talk about how the state budget works, where we spend our money, where we get it from, what we've done this past year to tackle our budget problems, and how we can really solve this pension crisis, in my opinion. So the first thing I want to talk about is the state budget. When we talk about it, we usually talk about the general revenue fund, which is the one here on the right. But there's other parts of the state budget that we should just be aware of, the other slices of the pie. The total is $66 billion. So about 8.2% of that is federal money that pays for some state agencies that are totally funded by the federal government, the EPA, the Department of Employment Security. And then, of course, we have these other state funds. It's an enormous amount of money, $24 billion. They come from fees and fines that people pay, and they fund various parts of government. But we haven't really focused on those. In fact, other states don't do it like this. They have them all kind of collapsed into one big fund. So that's something which we're really going to hopefully reform, because the budget transparency is diminished by having these things kind of hidden in these other funds. And just to show you a little bit about how that's kind of an intimidating slide. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but just to show you, this is the current fund balance for those, just the top 15 of these funds. And there's a huge amount of money here. Again, we don't really scrutinize them as the way we want. Just to give you an idea, there's a state and local sales tax reform fund. It gets its revenues from sales and use tax receipts. It builds up a surplus. It eventually obviously gets spent, but to manage our budget problems, it would probably be a good idea to look at these other state funds. If you ever hear about the term sweeping funds or borrowing from these other state funds, this is the category that we look to. All right, so let's get back to the next slide. So we go on the right side here, that is the general revenue fund, and that's the one that we usually talk about when we talk about our budget. And that is $33.7 billion. So where does the money come from? Personal income tax receipts is the biggest source of revenue. If you look at the sales tax, just under 20%. Keep in mind, I'll just say this, I'm not proposing any legislative changes here, but we don't tax, our sales tax does not cover very many services in the state. Most other states cover services, we do not. And also, I got in trouble here a couple years ago saying this, our state income tax, we are one of, I think, 12 states don't have an income tax, but of the states that have an income tax, we're one of the few that do not tax retirement income. I'm not proposing any changes, I'm just pointing it out. Other taxes and fees, you see the other taxes and fees, that's utility taxes and gaming, for example. So, a little history lesson on our Illinois income tax history. So, obviously our personal and corporate income tax rates have generated a lot of attention in the last couple of years. So let's look at this timeline. Governor Ogilvie started the income tax, the largest income tax in the history of the state of Illinois. Governor Ogilvie has that distinction, 2.5% personal, 4% corporate. We did go along twice with Governor Thompson and had 2 temporary income taxes. The first one expired after a year and a half, I believe it was, and the second one, Governor Edgar ran for governor and said, I want to make that income tax permanent, that income tax increase permanent. He campaigned on that and actually won, and so we did. We kept it permanent. And then in 2011, we passed the increase in both the personal and the corporate income tax rates. Now, again, if you're a Democrat, we went from 3% to 5%. So if you're a Democrat, that's a 2% increase in the Illinois income tax. If you're a Republican, it's a 67% tax increase. And both are true. So whichever you're. And reporters always say 67% too. So, and that of course expires and goes down January 1st, 2015. So let's look at the other states. Okay, so there's Illinois. That's 5%. It's a flat rate. The next one is Indiana. So Indiana is a little bit lower than us. The next one is Kentucky, then Missouri, Wisconsin, and Iowa. Okay? So those are the Midwestern states. Those are their tax rates compared to ours. Ours is, oh, you can see the last one there? That'll be Illinois when it goes back down on January 1st, 2015. Then we'll be lower than all of them. Right now, we're just slightly higher than Indiana, and that's our individual tax rate. Now, the corporate rates, right now we're at 7%. You see how it compares to Kentucky, Missouri, and Indiana, the other states. We're right in the middle. Frequently, people confuse our tax rates, our corporate tax rate, and they say it's 9.5%, which is not true. Ours is 7%, but we do have a 2.5% corporate income tax replacement tax, corporate personal property replacement tax, because we don't have a personal property tax. Other states do. So apples to apples, this is where we are with the corporate tax. And the other thing that you may have heard about since we raised our income tax is that all the jobs fled to Wisconsin, right? So I thought we'd put this little slide up here. Actually, they didn't. Since the income tax was increased in Illinois, we added 92,000 jobs, almost 92,000 jobs. Wisconsin, ironically enough, remember Scott Walker at the press conference says, "Come on to Wisconsin, Illinois just raised their income tax." Well, apparently that's not working for Scott because he actually lost 15,000 jobs since we raised our income tax. Now, I want to talk a little bit about our budget. So we're back to our budget. So little explanation of what we call the non-discretionary spending. This is our general revenue fund budget. The non-discretionary spending are things that we spend money on that are driven kind of by a formula. In order to spend less than that amount of money, we have to pass a law to change it, okay, which we have done to save some money. But that's what we call discretionary. And then that's the non-discretionary, and the discretionary is basically everything that we have left over. So if we look at the next slide, I'm going to just go through. This is kind of important. This is where we spend money in our general revenue fund. So we start with Medicaid. That's the federal, state, 50% each for our health care costs. There's like 3 million folks in Illinois eligible for Medicaid. The next one is pensions, and we're obviously going to come back and talk about pensions. The whole purpose of this whole show today is to show you how we're crowding out our pension costs are crowding out our budget. So that's 15.2%, but then we borrowed to pay for pensions a few years ago, and when you put two together, it's actually close to 20% is the cost of pensions. Debt service on our capital bonds is relatively low. Statutory transfers out, that's the money that we give to local governments in the RTA. So we do have some revenue sharing. The entire operation of state government, 3.5% plus the prisons, 4.8%. The total is less than $4 billion. The entire operation of state budget, of state government. So when people say, why don't you just cut the waste? Well, state government only is like 12% of the total problem. The human service budget, when you think of human services, these are the people we contract with to provide basic services for disabled or seniors or children. Think Sister Rosemary Misericordia, that's the human service budget. Preschool through high school, that's the general state aid budget. It's actually been declining. We'll show you some statistics in a few minutes, but that's how we fund our schools. In higher education, I'm sorry to say, with Chris Kennedy being here, has been shrinking as a result of this increase in the cost of the pensions. So we have, however, taken some really tough measures to cut back on some of our spending. So this last year, just look at what we had to do. We had the couple things to point out here. It's over here. The pension cost increase from the previous year to this year, almost $1 billion. Okay? Medicaid cost from one year to the other, we kept it at zero because we made some major cuts to the Medicaid program, which I'll explain in a second. Also, we put aside $1 billion to pay old bills. So those were some of the tough choices that we had last year. Now, I mentioned this Medicaid bill. This is called the SMART Act. And basically, we passed this, which had the effect of really having a value of $2.4 billion. We made changes to the program to reduce eligibility, not an easy thing to do. We strengthened the state's ability to fight fraud and abuse, and we cut rates for anywhere from 2.7 to 3.5% for some of our providers. And the next slide shows that we also increased some revenues. The one that, quite frankly, I'm actually proud about passing is an increase in the cigarette tax, okay, by $1. It not only does it bring in $350 million, but it has the other effect of having 59,000, a little over 59,000 Illinoisans stop smoking because of the increase, and 77,000 kids don't start. So coupled with the hospital assessment and the federal matching that you get, the whole package saved us $2.4 billion. And we're going to revisit it, of course, at the end of the calendar year or fiscal year to see if we need to have any more revisions to it. Now, The discretionary side, that's the stuff that's left over after you finish with the non-discretionary. These spendings cuts came about because we didn't have enough money. So this is, again, the cost shift, the squeezing out of the rest of the budget by the pension is what's happening. So you look at these totals, these are amazing. So we had to cut human services by $200 million. That's the Sister Rosemary part. We have education, over $320 million between higher ed and elementary and secondary had to be cut, in part because we had an extra $1 billion that we had to pay for in our pensions. So this past year, we had a tough budget year, but we accomplished a lot of things. We have a balanced budget. We did start to pay down some of our old bills. We made the pension payment rather than skipping the pension payment like some governors have done and claim that they're being fiscally sound. We actually borrowed to pay for our pensions a number of years ago at really low interest rates, and now it was a smart thing to do because obviously the stock market is close to 14,000. It's more than doubled since we borrowed that money. This year we didn't borrow, we made that pension payment. We had to cut this discretionary spending and hold Medicaid flat, which, as I indicated, we did. We accomplished it. But the preschool through higher ed has been cut. Now, this is an example of what's happened for education funding. I'm just reiterating the point. We'd always had an increase. That was one of Emil Jones's primary focus when he was the president of the Senate. But because of this pension problem, for the last, I think, 5 years now, we've had to cut education, preschool through higher ed, every year. And so it's really been very tough on education. Now, some people say, I thought the lottery was supposed to take care of education. We always get that at a town meeting, so I have to put this in. This is just for fun. Total amount of money we spend on education, you throw everything together, property taxes and everything, what is it, $36 billion? The lottery's $600 million. Okay, if we didn't have the lottery, we'd be $600 million short. I appreciate the lottery. It does bring in that money, but it doesn't solve the whole problem because this is where we have to get the rest of the money from. Now, education versus pensions. So you see on the bottom is the pension cost. Just back in fiscal year '06, we spent $800 million, right? This year, $5.1 billion. Education, you see it's going up, and then it comes down. Pretty soon, if you count the debt on that borrowing for the pension funds, those lines have already crossed. And so this is why we are so focused on pensions. Well, maybe it'll get better next year, right? What's next year's pension cost supposed to be? It's already been certified. Now it's another $1 billion, a little over $1 billion. Last year was a little under, this year an extra $1 billion. So this is why it's so important for us to focus on trying to get a reform. Now, people have said Springfield is dysfunctional, you haven't done anything on pensions. Actually, that's not true. We have passed a pension reform. In 2010, we passed a bill that means that for the last 2 years, all the new hires in the state, they have been hired under these much reduced benefits. The retirement age has been increased to 67. We ended their compounded COLA, which is the most expensive part of our pension. This bill that has been in the law for a couple of years will save $71 billion between now and 2045 when we are on a schedule to get fully funded. So it was a very significant piece of legislation which we were able to pass, obviously over the objections of the unions who were affected by it. So we do, though, in solving our pension problem, have to be aware of the fact that we have a Constitution which has a pension clause. And I've shown this to you before, but this is what it says. And I do have a very good lawyer who's been researching this, who says, you know, it wouldn't be smart to pass a bill to claim you did something and then a year later find out that it was unconstitutional. So what this really means is that the pension clause makes a public employee's pension an enforceable contractual relationship which cannot be unilaterally changed unless you enter into a new contract. So pension benefits are contractual. They can be modified through contract principles, okay? So I told you that the COLA is the thing that's costing us so much money, all right? Just to give you, I think I showed this slide last year, just thought I'd emphasize it again. So if you take an example of someone who retires at age 60 with a $50,000 annuity, if you have a straight COLA, by the time you're 90, it's $95,000. If you have a compounded COLA, like we have, it's a lot more. In fact, the difference is $250,000 over the lifetime. And that's what's so expensive. Now, would we like to be able to give this compounded COLA out to everybody? Sure we would. But this is the part that is the most expensive part of the benefit. And this is the one that our legislation is, quite frankly, aimed at. And that is a bill called Senate Bill 1, which I have introduced. And it has two parts. And this is the politics of it. This is a compromise. So Part A is a bill that had been talked about, introduced in the House. And Part A was a bill that Representative Necritz and Leader Cross proposed, but they actually didn't vote on it in the House. The only pension bill that actually passed last year was the one that the Senate passed, which was Part B. So my plan here is to try to compromise with the House. We'll put both of them in the same package. And the way it would work is that the primary one is this Part A. I personally obviously have indicated it has some constitutional questions. And if for some reason it's found to be constitutional, then it's the law. And it saves a lot of money. And that's why people are for it. If, however, it's found to be unconstitutional, then we have the backup, which is built into the same law, which would be Part B. So as you can see, Part A reduces pension benefits. It takes that existing 3% COLA and it replaces it with a COLA that has a limit on it, and depends on whether you receive Social Security or not. And the employees have to contribute more money into their pension system. And again, if there's a cap on your maximum pension, it saves a lot of money. Now, Part B is the bill that we've actually passed out of the Senate, never called in the House. This uses the contractual approach, okay? And this is one that gives you two choices. And this is why we feel it's constitutional, because you're giving a choice to someone, maybe a Hobson's choice, but it's a choice nonetheless. So if you agree to give up your compounded COLA and delay it for 5 years or until age 67, and you get to keep your current, you get to keep your simple COLA, okay? So you accept a simple COLA, you give up your compounded COLA, and then you'll have health care, guaranteed access to health care, and all your salary increases, if you're an active person, all your salary increases will be part of your final package. But if, however, you say, no, I don't want to do that, I want to keep my compounded COLA, then you're going to lose your access to your state retiree health care, and all your pay raises for the rest of your life are not going to be part of the pension. So we're not sure how many people are going to take this deal, not take the deal. It depends on whether you're a retiree or a 30-year-old school teacher. But in doing so, the state will save a lot of money, okay? And we will stabilize our future cost of this pension going forward. And this is a generational bill. This is a bill we're one vote away from changing the whole dynamic. Our state has been downgraded in terms of how we're rated. This whole thing can change with this one bill. We are estimated to have to pay in about $309 billion in the next 30 years. This bill, Part B, will save as much as $86 billion of that and reduce our unfunded liabilities by $17 million immediately. So I try to do that as fast as Chris Kennedy. We talked about how the state budget works, where the money comes from, where we spend our money, what we've done this past year to try to balance our budget, and then this pension crisis, which, again, I've introduced this bill. It's Senate Bill 1. It can be amended in the House. We're just trying to see if we can do it. Just so you know, this is a bill that cannot be passed by Democrats only. You might want to say, you got 40 people, why don't you just pass it? Well, there's opposition to this legislation in both the House and the Senate, in both the Democrats and Republicans. And we have to work together. We were able to do that last year with my Republican counterpart, Senator Radonio. We passed the bill with just barely 30 votes. It's not an easy vote, because guess what? There's retirees, there are union people that say they don't want to change anything. Their solution is to raise taxes by some $2 billion and just use that to pay for the pension crisis. Well, I don't think that even Sister Rosemary would agree that if there's a $2 billion tax increase, none of it should go to her. So that's why we have this, this dilemma. But again, I'm ready, willing, and able to try to tackle it. It's not going to be an easy solution, but I'm so glad that I have half my caucus here today to listen to this. And so now they're not allowed to ask any questions yet, but anybody else here, I'd be more happy to answer. Thank you very much.
Raise your hand if you have a question. City Club E will be right there. City Club J, right off the bat. Joyce Saxon. Lawrence Spivak of City Club. Do your Glad to see I got a couple of people there playing the game, but that's about it. Do your Medicaid figures include the new people enrolled?
Oh, you're probably talking about the Medicaid expansion? Yeah, that's a piece of legislation that I've been lobbied on today by Tony Breckwinkle and others. That's a new bill as a result of the Affordable Care Act, and we will be taking that up very quickly when we come back into Springfield. So the question is, are we going to pass a bill to expand Medicaid consistent with the federal law? I'm supportive of that. I believe we will do that this year.
Okay. Jeff Collard from Haymarket Center. Jeff, normally because of the legend of Tom Roser, will read this entire question. Very long. We have learned that the Cook County Medicaid waiver will not cover residential substance abuse treatment, making the Department of Human Services budget extremely important this year. Will the Senate work to preserve the DHS budget? Yes or no?
Yeah. Sounds like it's tied to the pension reform bill, doesn't it? That's the point of the whole speech here. We have pressures. You saw what we had to cut. We have to cut things because we're spending all this money off the top to pay for pensions. I would say in general, the Medicaid cuts that we passed, there were some 64 different areas that we passed. We hope that we're going to save money. And if some folks who are affected by that can come to us and say, you know what you did wasn't right, there's a better way to do it to save the same amount of money, we're open to those suggestions. So any budget pressures, though, we have to first pass a pension reform so that we are not don't have such a big crowding out effect of those pension costs.
We got two questions here. I'll give you the kudos one first, warm you up a little bit. Janet Williams from the Respiratory Health Association. Where are you, Janet? Raise your hand. Right back there. Congratulations on the 5th anniversary of Smoker-Free Illinois. What will you do to protect it?
Okay.
Now, that is not a puff question.
Yeah, we passed 5 years ago. We passed a law saying you can't smoke in here today while you're having lunch, and we're very happy we did that. And actually, the best, as I said before, the thing that cuts back on people smoking is actually to raise the cigarette tax, which we did. And there's been efforts by some in the gaming legislation that's being proposed to have waivers for smoking. That's not going to happen. So that's what we're going to do to make sure that we don't change that law. Thank you, Jennifer.
In the long history of the City Club, this is a first. Mr. Mazur, our first typed question. This is legendary. Obviously, what you said had no impact. Here we go. This is.
I didn't answer the question, apparently.
This is. I don't think it made a difference. Marcia Jimenez from Swedish Covenant Hospital. Where are you, Marcia? Back there. I'll just read parts of it. According to the National Alliance on Mental Illness, between 2009 and 2012, Illinois slashed funding for mental health programs by more than 30%. 30%. Before those cuts, Illinois per capita spending on mental health was about $85, while the national average was $123. You get the gist of this question. Would you support restoring mental and behavioral health care services in Illinois? And if so, given the current budget crisis, how would you recommend it be paid for?
The reason why I come here and show you the pie chart is because the things have to add up. Individually, you might all have your issues, all of which are important, but at the end, they have to add up. And what we've been doing in the area of Medicaid is that because it's driven by a formula, we've been appropriating a certain amount of money, but the actual costs have been greater than that. So we're like $9 billion in debt. We owe people money because we've had a structural deficit. So the way we do it is as I showed you, we go after Medicaid eligibility, try to be more efficient, we lower the cost. With regard to pensions, we have to go follow the Constitution, pass some pretty convoluted legislation, but stop the dramatic increase in money going out the door to pay for pensions. Once we do that, over the next, it's a long-term process, we will have more money to deal with our budget. Keep in mind also, and I would just say to you, next year when people start running for governor, keep in mind what our tax rates are, and it's going back down on January 1st, 2015. The difference between what we get now and that lower number is about $5 billion. So if you want to go back up to that pie chart and show me where you want us to cut $5 billion, questions so far have been spending more, then have at it. When folks run for governor, cross-examine them and ask them what their plan is for the taxes and how they expect to have a balanced budget and still provide the needs that are so important for all of us. I hope that answers your question. Thanks.
We will assume, John, that you're not running for governor. I'm just making that as a...
You're correct.
Thank you. Sharon Alter, raise your hand. Back there, former Harper Community College professor. This is about sirs, here we go. College university employees who pay to the state university retirement system pay not just towards pensions, but also towards the COLA when they retire. She goes on that the basic question is, how is what you're proposing constitutional when the COLA is going to be involved?
Yeah. You're given a choice if you're a retiree or an employee for the state university system to keep your compounded COLA, but you do not have a constitutional right to your health care. That's something which we provide. And so you have a choice between, if you're retired, keeping your compounded COLA or keeping your health care. If you choose to keep your health care, you still get a simple COLA. And I should point out that one of the problems we have in Illinois, one of the reasons why our pension system is so underfunded is because over the years, the state has not put as much money in as we should have. But that's due in part to the fact that we are responsible for all the universities and all the community colleges. Even though they're not state employees, the state's responsible for paying the employer contribution to those pension systems. And in the case of the teachers, the suburbs and downstate, the state's the employer. We're the ones that have to pay in their amount. They pay next to nothing. So that's one of the reasons why there's been such a underfunding in the pension system. So it's constitutional in my opinion because you're given a choice and it's a contractual arrangement that therefore complies with the Constitution.
Hey. Mark Weyermuller, raise your hand. You know, those guys in the back obviously want to move up because we don't have a damn question from anybody up here. It's a two-part question. Part one, is Paul Green's lunch sold out? Not quite. Number two, pensions, kiss up, kick down. Pensions, would you consider on new employees, IRAs and 401ks to get government out of the pension business?
Well, just keep in mind when you go from a defined benefit to a defined contribution, then all the new people that you hire, they stop paying into the pension system. And so, but we still have this constitutional obligation to continue to pay the pensions for the folks that have already been hired. So actually, to do that might have a long-term, there might be some benefit to it, but short-term, it's an incredible cost to the state. And of course, we don't have the money to pay for that extra cost.
Okay, two more questions and we'll let the media go after the senator in the room over there in the saloon. We're This is from Board Member Ed Mazer. Senator, why are members of the judiciary not included in the pension reform proposals?
I know it sounds like a conspiracy, but it's not. First of all, there's very few judges. There's only 950 judges active right now. They have a very small pension system. The reason why is because when you get into this contract that we're talking about, that you need offer, acceptance, and consideration, there's a specific provisions in the Constitution that provide for judges, and judges' salaries cannot be diminished in any way. We had a lawsuit over that with our previous governor. And so as a result, we feel it's not because we don't want them to be included in the benefits. Perhaps if we have a court case in the future, we'll see what the court thinks is constitutional and not constitutional, and we can certainly add them. But in terms of the big cost, it's a really, really small part of it. So is the same thing is true for the General Assembly, but we don't have the same constitutional provision that applies to us. And keep in mind, we want to pass the same law that applies to us as it does to the rest of the state employees.
A final question from the moderator, Sandbag. Bloomberg, Illinois credits rating lowered by S&P as pension costs rise. Cut one level to A- by Standard & Poor, who will probably want to cut it again. How do we deal with that when we have to borrow money at an increased rate?
Yeah, you just simply read what they said. You read exactly what they said when they made the cut, when they lowered the rating. They said you didn't deal with your pension crisis. They read the papers too. We went to the General Assembly. We were there. The governor tried very hard to try to get us a solution before the end of the last General Assembly, and we didn't do it. So as a result, they warned us before, we didn't do it. That's why it's Senate Bill 1. I'm ready, as soon as I can get the votes in the Senate, to pass it as soon as possible, working with my Republican colleague, and hopefully we'll have it over to the House, and hope that the House can pass it as well. Once that's signed, our ratings will go back up. Thank you very much for inviting me.